Hi, I'm Aluk Edwardson. I'm the cultural educator, artist, mother, and Arctic person who put this cultural learning resource together. If you'd like to learn more about who I am and the work that I do, please visit www.creativedecolonization.org. This cultural learning resource is going to dive into the work of William Qquilluq, who wrote the People of Kauwerak, Legends of the Northern Eskimo, with the assistance of Laurel Bland. William Qquilluq was told old stories from his grandfather, who he lived with as a young child. He was born in 1869 in Iñupiat, or Point Hope, and moved back to Qquilluq when he was 7. Qquilluq was a village in the central island area of the Seward Peninsula and is where his parents and grandparents were from. William Qquilluq died in 1972. The stories began at Sinrook Village. This was a village 27 miles west of where Nome is today. There was an old lady named Nasaruk. This means hood. She had a grandchild named Puniruk. This means cute little daughter. Their home was at the end of the village. It was not a very big house, but they lived in it comfortably. They had no one to hunt for them. The people in the village always gave them meat and fish. Whenever they received the meat or fish, Grandma always dried them for future use. Whenever they were dry, she put them in a poke, a skin bag, with seal oil to save for winter time. In the summer, Nasaruk and her granddaughter went out and picked all sorts of plants and leaves when they were growing. They saved them in pokes with seal oil too. People in the village took care of Nasaruk and Puniruk because there was no one to take care of them in their house. Soon it was getting real cold. A big storm came. In the few days, everything was all frozen up and snow was flying in the blowing wind. The winter had started all over again instead of summertime coming. People all along the Norton Sound and Bering Sea coast were already dead from hunger. Only the old lady, Nasaruk, and her granddaughter, Puniruk, were left at the Sinrook village. The old lady and the little girl had lived off all the food Nasaruk had saved up from what people had given them. Nasaruk went to every house in the village. She wanted to find even one living person. There was no one. There was only one place she did not go to. The next morning, Grandma did not say much to Puniruk. She seemed to be thinking about something. Finally, the girl asked her why she was so quiet and not talking very much. The old lady said, "Puniruk, I was wondering why we have lived to this day. Surely there must be someone looking after us because in this village we too are still alive. All the others have starved and died. We should be thankful for this, but I still do not know what or who we should say helped us. The others were so healthy and stronger than we are, but they all died off. I watched every full moon time. This full moon is the 7th since the storm started, but we still struggle on, and we are still alive." Our great-grandfathers used to tell us there are some things or someone close by us that is supposed to care for people. This also looks after all the animals in the land and sea and the fish in the waters. Every living thing, small or large, is looked after. I am beginning to believe what our old folks said. I do not know where it is staying or what it looks like. Our grandfolks used to say we must not play or make fun of any living creature in the land or the sea. Whoever does a harm or plays unkindly with any sort of animal will get the same treatment sometime and die. They said, "Do not do any bad deed, but help the living creatures. If anyone is kind to people or animals, they shall live a long time in this world." I am getting old. My life is getting shorter, but I would like you to live until we pass this trouble we are going through. Remember what I am telling you. These are our forefathers' rules. People should follow them. If you have a future to live, always abide by these rules. They are things that people should abide by from generation down through the coming generations. One morning, not too long after Nasaruk talked to Puniruk about the teachings of the forefathers, the old lady went out to see the weather. On this day, when she came out, the sky was clear and blue. The sun was shining bright. There were no clouds and not a breath of wind. Grandma built a fire. She put a little of the skin from the skin boat and some of the rawhide they had left from their eating on the fire. She put on some other things too. She did it because she and her little granddaughter were grateful for the beautiful weather around them. The old lady took a piece of walrus skin and laid it on the fire for an offering. She put it right on the fire. Now I have offered to someone or something a scent to make the weather smell good in the air and the wind. This is to say we hope we may have good fresh air from now on. This second gift is to show we are grateful our life has lasted to this time, and something has helped us and made us to be brave enough to live through the storms. Please help us to reach the summertime, and let me live through it. My grandchild is so young. My lifetime needs to be carried on until my little granddaughter can take care of herself. Nasaruk dropped another piece of walrus skin in the fire. Then she stood up and looked around once more. I love this vignette we have, and there's more about these two people in the People of Kauwerak itself, but I love this vignette because it highlights the importance of grandparents and youth and the relationship between the two. They both need each other. The grandma needs the daughter to be able to pass on her knowledge, her wisdom, her lifeline, and the granddaughter definitely needs the grandmother. She's too young to care for herself. So there's a synchronicity here that's really beautiful. There was a woman named Naparuk. This means pointed. She had a son named Anayuk. This means eddies in water. They were the only two people left in the village at Utanuk with very much strength. All the others were dead or so weak from starving they would soon die. Naparuk thought over what she should do. Most everyone was dead or dying. She saw if she stayed there, things would get worse for her little son and herself. She would soon be getting weak like the others still living. In a few more days, she knew she too would be gone. She was worried about her son. She did not like to see her son left to be all alone after she died. That thought made her feel sad and wonder what she could do. Naparuk made up her mind to go away from the village. There was not a thing in the place to eat or live by. She tried to fish for tomcod. There were none in the water. She still had a few dried tomcod that she had found in a little storage shed about 5 miles from the village. There was still a little poke of seal oil. The mother decided she had better go away while she still had something to use. By now, everyone in the village was gone. Naparuk went all over to every house. She made sure there was no other people alive. There was nobody left in any house. Naparuk put her little son on her back and fastened her belt over her breast to hold him safe in her parka. She started going off west from the village. Before she went around the point, she stopped and looked back toward the village. She looked where her husband lay in the spot where she buried him. She began to cry. The tears were falling down her cheeks. The woman said to herself, "He is dead. He cannot help us anymore. I must try and go on my way to somewhere that I do not know. A new country might help keep me alive. I must go. The mother looked back once more at her village. It was to be the last time. Once she passed around the point, she would never see that place again. Oh, it used to be a very good place to live. There were lots of things to live by. Now it looks so lonely and empty. Naparok stood looking at her village for a long time. It seemed like someone was talking to her, only not loud enough to hear by her ears. A voice seemed to say, "You must go. Face the whole world and taste both death and happiness. You will see a new world as far as you go. Go now before it is too late. Keep on going until it comes to the end." The woman started off, walking with all the burden she carried inside and outside of her. I think this is such a touching beginning of this story about Naparok. It shows her heart, her passion, and that last look back of a village that disappeared. You know, we hear about villages disappearing, but we might not think it also happened in the past. You know, this woman is carrying, she's the last of her community. She's carrying her village with her and her little son. And that really touches me. One day, the woman made up her mind. They would stop walking in the daytime and walk at night. She found a real dry place to take a nap out in the sun. She thought, "It is a good thing I have a seal intestine rain cover. This will keep us warm and dry." Naparok began to walk at night. In the morning, when the sun came up, she stopped to sleep and rest. One night, they came to Sunlik. It was on the bay. The woman looked into every house. There was no one living. The woman found a new parka. It was inside and outside squirrel skin parka. She found another 4 pairs of mukluks and a kayak sled. This was a short sled made for carrying a kayak on rough ice when out hunting for seal. It was 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. It had ivory plates on the runners. The mother took some other things like pots, a rain parka for herself and one for her son. This time, she thought, we have everything we might use. She loaded the sled and pulled it with the skin rope. She kept looking. She found an old poke with a little oil in it and some rawhide. Whenever Naparok found a bare spot in the ground, she dug out grass roots. She began to feel better. Soon they had used most of their oil, and the rawhide and the dry tomcods were gone. It had come down to only the roots to eat. The woman traveled at night. In the morning she was always very tired. She was exhausted from hunger. One morning they came to a nice dry spot to rest. Naparok laid her rain cover on the ground. Then she placed a caribou skin over it and laid down to rest. The sun was shining down on the mother and her son. Naparok put her husband's spear alongside them and was ready to sleep. Naparok began to fall asleep or go away from her body like dying. She tried to shake herself awake. It seemed her ears could hear something a long way away. Yet her ears really could not hear anything at all. She felt like she was beginning to sink in a deep hole. That's why, when she tried to shake herself in order to wake up, she came back from her dream. She found herself sitting up instead of laying down. She looked around to find out if she was still staying with her son. She saw she was still right where she made camp. So she laid back down to sleep more beside her little boy. It seemed to the mother her load inside was getting heavier, yet she would do all she could for her son. She was scared now to close her eyes. She laid in the sun a long time. Later, all at once, she slept again. Naparok soon awoke from her second sleeping. She did not move. she felt funny. She seemed to hear something somewhere far off. A voice seemed to call her name, but she could not quite make out what it was. She still did not move. Soon she heard plain that it was a woman's voice calling her by her name. Next time it called, it seemed she could remember that voice. It sounded like her grandmother's voice. The woman moved at once, and sitting up, began to look around toward the voice. Then she saw it. It was her grandma, but her grandmother died 3 months before the starvation time. Qquilluq could not believe her eyes. She did not know if she was dreaming or if what she saw was real. Her grandma said to her, "Qquilluq, I come to tell you that you must continue to travel on. Yes, I know what trouble you have. I have known what has happened to you right up to this day. You have been traveling for 2 months now. I know you have tried to save your son, who is my 2nd generation. Now you must go on again. Follow the coast. You will come to a storage hut filled with dry meat and oil. There is also dry fish and leaves and oil. You must stay there until you and your son get strong enough to travel on. Be brave and faithful and live with courage. Your boy will repay you for what you have done for him, even though you have great pain with your hunger. You have done a great thing for your people. Your son will be the father of another generation when he grows up to his manhood. Now take him and go on. Do not delay any longer here because you are getting weaker. You must leave while you have the chance to continue traveling." Suddenly, Qquilluq's grandma disappeared. Qquilluq loaded the sled with all things she had. She started walking again. She did not feel so good, yet she did her best. She was weak, tired, hungry, and exhausted. All these things worked together on her, but still, she believed her grandmother. She continued even though she had to stop and rest often. At last she got to that place. There was a storage hut. Driftwood was laid upright in the entranceway. She worked on those pieces of wood. Pretty soon she took a piece out, and she could peep inside. She saw some pokes were lying in there. She cried out with joy. She pulled enough wood away from the door to get one of the pokes. She opened it and started to take out what was inside. There were some Qquilluq, dry meat, some cooked meat, some blubber, some green leaves. Qquilluq and her son had a feast on it. Qquilluq, his bearded seal. The snow was melting, and the rivers would soon follow. Qquilluq figured she had better go before too much water came out of the river. The mother and son started off once more with all of the grub from the hut piled with the other useful things on the little sled. It was quite a load, but Qquilluq could pull it along the shore ice. On they went. They came to Rocky Point Village. Qquilluq looked over to the top of the bluff. It was all bare and there was no snow to go on with the sled. She looked below the bluff. There was ice along the edge, but it seemed the ice had been drifting in and out. It was rough and jagged. The woman took the shore ice out on the bay. She was going on the ice. While she was going on the ice, a crack opened, and the ice started to drift out. Qquilluq noticed the crack too late to jump across. Qquilluq, her boy, and the little sled were on the ice as it drifted out farther and farther. Pretty soon they came to a fog. They could not see land anymore. They stayed on the fog for a long time. Qquilluq had to count the nights to know how long. They had been on the ice for 14 days. The food was almost gone. While Qquilluq lay on the ice, The fog began to clear. The sun came out shining. Qquilluq felt so much better. Finally, she tried to stand once more. It was hard to do. Her little boy woke up. She tried to stand once more. She made it this time. She made the few steps towards her boy in the sled, but she was so weak her legs felt funny. Qquilluq walked over to her boy. She took out what food they had left. They had some dry walrus and a little seal oil. She felt a little better. She raised her hands upward and gave thanks to whatever it was that saved her. She did not know whatever it might be. She believed there was something looking after her and the boy. She talked to someone to say thanks. She waited to get stronger. It was getting better weather all the time. She and the boy rested and slept. On the 15th morning, Qquilluq woke up and found there was wind blowing from the south. The ice field they were on was breaking up in smaller and smaller pieces. She watched from now on. The woman was worried. Then she said, "Why should I be worried now? We will both drown at the same time. We will both be dead at the same time. Before I would die before my little son. Now we have a chance to die together." The big pieces of ice seemed to be drifting in toward land. That evening, Qquilluq went to sleep. She did not have hope or courage left. All she wanted now was to die. She wanted to get away from hunger, suffering, and the terrible things she and her son had been through. When Qquilluq woke once more, she saw the daylight beginning in the east. She looked toward the land. She could not see anything. The heavy fog was on. Qquilluq laid down once more. She felt the ice touch something. She got up and looked. Sure enough, the ice was touching the edge of a beach. She could see it was there. It sure was good to be on ground instead of ice. She raised both her arms upward toward the sun. She cried, told how thankful she was to whatever kept them from being out there where there was no land, only ice and sea. She talked out in her voice and said how grateful they were. Something had put her and the boy on dry land. Qquilluq heard an elderly woman calling, "Qquilluq, Qquilluq, look here." Qquilluq looked and she saw her grandma once more. Her grandma began to talk to her. "You will see your future that you will come to. You will see all of it. You will see your generations go to generations. Those generations will start from your son. They will be a great man. He will have a good wife. He will be the father to all of a second generation of this country. He will find a place to start a new generation where people will live happy. Your son will have good ways and wisdom. He will lead others to better ways. He will help his new generation and the generation to follow. He will be a good teacher to his sons and daughters. His generation will learn a good manner from him and honest ways of living. He will be strong and healthy, and so will his family. Your son will lead his people always with a good will. His sons will come to work together for the good of everybody. They will show by their ways the best ways to live by the land and with each other. This will be followed for generation after generation. Now, granddaughter, look to your right." Qquilluq looked where her grandmother pointed. There was a big, roomy house. It had 2 big caches and 1 skin boat outside. There was also a kayak. The skin boat was on 4 posts, and the kayak was hanging under one of the caches. There were 5 big dogs tied to the posts. Qquilluq turned to look at her grandma. The old lady was nowhere around. Then Qquilluq began walking toward the house. She came close. A fine man came out and met her with outstretched arms. He had a big smile on his face. He welcomed her, and he said, "Ma, you still travel. Soon your journey will end, but you must see your future. Come on inside." They went into the house. Qquilluq found a woman with 3 boys and 3 girls sitting there. The man said, "These are your grandsons and daughters. I am your son. I am going to show you how old you will be when you come to a great age." The man took a big wooden bowl with a handle on it, like a bucket. He filled it with water. Then he told Qquilluq to look into the bowl. "You will see yourself. You will see what it looks like when you come to see your family." The mother looked into the water. She saw herself. Her face was getting old. She looked thinner. She had lost her roundness. Then the man said, "When you go outside, you will see your 3rd and 4th generation, but you will live up to your 5th generation. You must go now and enjoy your generations, which you will all see coming in their time. You must look toward the north. Do not look back. Just walk up to them that you see." Qquilluq went out. She looked toward the north. Then she saw 7 big roomy houses. Each house had 2 big caches. Each house had a boat and a kayak. There were 7 men standing waiting for her and 6 women with their children. As they came near, 3 men came to meet her. All were men with families. Then the 3 women came too with their families. They were all glad to see her. Everyone went into the house of the old man. The elderly man said, "Grandma, we are the 3rd and 4th and 5th generation. You see, this girl is making a little baby. She is my oldest daughter. She is making your 5th generation. I know you come over from our 1st and 2nd generation. Now I will let you see what you look like now." He filled a wooden bucket like the one at the other house. Qquilluq looked in. She saw herself. She sure was real old. She could hardly recognize herself. The elderly man began to talk. "You are still on your journey now, but you will live until you see us all down to this 5th generation. You will walk with a cane. See, here is your cane. Now you have seen us all. You have to be on your journey." He gave the woman a cane. She tried to stand up, but she could not straighten up. She was so old she had to use the cane to stand up. She walked out, but she walked slow when she came out. Qquilluq blinked her eyes. She looked around. She was sitting down beside her son. Qquilluq looked at her son. "You are going to be a great man after all. You will be the 2nd generation." All at once, Qquilluq saw a person standing on the other end of the village. She stopped and rubbed her eyes. She looked again. Sure enough, there was a person with a tomkuk, or a woman's dress as it's understood here, on. The woman walked toward her. Before she got to Qquilluq, she stopped. She looked carefully at the woman. Then she started down Qquilluq again. When she got close, Qquilluq could see she was an old woman. The old lady said, "Where are you coming from?" Qquilluq replied, "A long ways, Utanuk." I want to point out here how important it is to look to the future when you are moving away from disaster and crisis and climate change, is to think about the next steps. I love how this story brings in the ancestors and brings in the future as well. It's not just about what happened before, it's about what comes after. And I think that's beautifully represented in this particular story. The old lady welcomed her. "Come, let us go back to our home. It isn't much of a house, but it is good enough for my granddaughter and me." They came to the place. The old lady looked at Naparok's sled. She saw a face in the sled. She stopped and looked at the young woman with wide eyes open in surprise. "What do you have here?" Naparok answered the old lady. "He is my boy." By that time, the old lady's granddaughter came out of the house to see what had happened to her grandma. Then she heard her talking to someone. Naparok grabbed the little girl and hugged her. The old lady cried out, "So we have young people with us too. Oh, it is so good to see people alive." Then the old lady said, "I am called Nasaruk. My granddaughter is Paniruk." The younger woman replied, "They call me Naparok, and my son is called Anayok." Then the two women sat together and told each other their stories of the past days since the starvation time began. Soon they decided to stay together. In the month of Serhutoivik, during the full moon, old Nasaruk died. The others put her body in an old walrus skin and laid her on a driftwood cache. Then they piled driftwood upward all around her body. You could see the big pile from a long distance. That pile is all dry and rotted now, but the remains can still be seen. Anayok and Paniruk had children before Nasaruk died. They had 3 boys and 3 girls. Naparok began to see how her dream was beginning to come true. She had the first and second generation now. She was not quite old yet, but she noticed she did not feel like she did in other times. She was still lively and her health was good. She was still strong and active in many ways. She taught her grandchildren about the ways of their great-grandfathers and mothers and how they once lived. She told them many times about their goodwill for people and how people must be helpful to anyone they meet. She taught them they must also have goodwill toward all living animals in the land and sea and be helpful to them too. She told them how they must not play with the animals. They should kill them when they needed them and not wake them. She explained what the old folks taught her. There is someone or something looking after these things so no one will go hungry. Someone gave the animals to be useful to many people. Soon, someone will take life away from us if we are greedy or mean to the animals. Our lives will all be short. Time passed. One time, in Nasir Sirvik, Anayok watched the moon. At midnight, the moon was showing. It leaned backward. In the morning, he said to his family, "The moon is good. We must travel with the boat. We will have good dry weather for traveling. Let us get ready to explore the country." My mother had a dream about a place where we would live and she would see 5 generations come. It was not this place. We should look for the country of my mother's dream. It is a promise of a better place with plenty to live by. I have made up my mind. We must find that land before I get old. We must all see it with our own eyes. All of Naparok's dream came true. Finally, she had to use a cane to stand up and to walk. One day, she died. Her body was placed not far from the end of Salt Lake. Her husband died a little later. Both their bodies were put in this same place. Today there is grass growing on their remains. Only a few people know where that place is. The first, second, third, fourth, and fifth generations of Naparok are our great, great, great forefathers and foremothers. The father of our people is Anayok. The mother is Paniruk. They kept our people alive after the 3rd disaster. No one would have survived the terrible time of starvation, and we would not have lived in our time if their folks had not saved them. We call them our 2nd generation mother and father. They lived most of their lifetime in Iñupiat Basin. This was before Kauwerak village was built. They were the first generation of Kauwerak Inuit. They had lots and lots of grandchildren for several generations. Iñupiat and Qquilluq lived up to a real old age. They are resting in graves not far from Naparuk and her last husband. We old folks are proud of our second generation mother and father, and we still know where their graves are today.